He smiled on screen, but behind the scenes, he despised Bob Denver. And now, decades later, the truth finally comes out. We all loved Gilligan's Island, the laughs, the chemistry, the unforgettable characters. But behind that tropical paradise, there was a storm brewing, one that would shape the legacy of the show forever. At the center of it, Alan Hale Jr., the skipper, and his quiet, burning hatred for Gilligan himself, Bob Denver. This isn't the story you think you know. On screen, he was America's favorite captain. Off screen, he was a time bomb of silent resentment, and no one knew it. Not until years later. Alan Hale Jr. wasn't just some random actor who lucked into a sitcom. He was Hollywood royalty. Born in 1921 to a father who acted alongside Errol freakin' Flynn, Alan was raised in the golden glow of studio lights and red carpets. He knew the business, respected the craft, and played the long game. While other actors chased headlines, Alan did the hard work. He showed up. He trained. He served in the U.S. Coast Guard during YU. Not for PR, but because he believed in something bigger than fame. When he came back, he didn't complain. He hit the ground running, building a career brick by brick. By the early 1960s, he had paid his dues. He had the look, tall, strong, commanding, but also the heart. You couldn't fake that smile. Casting him as the skipper in Gilligan's Island felt like destiny. Audiences loved him. He was the anchor of the show, the father figure, the protector, the comic relief. But here's the part no one saw coming. Despite playing the captain, Alan Hale Jr. was never given control of the ship, because someone else, someone younger, skinnier, and goofier, was quietly becoming the real star of the show. And that cut deep. But if you think Alan Hale Jr. was just the friendly skipper, think again, because what happened next? It changed everything, and it's where the resentment started to boil. So don't blink, because the real story is just getting started. At first it was subtle. The writers gave Bob Denver more lines. The camera lingered on his face longer. Fan mail? Piling up in Denver's dressing room. Media interviews? All asking about Gilligan, not the skipper. And worst of all, the narrative had shifted. What was once an ensemble show was suddenly being branded Gilligan's Island, his island. To the public, Bob Denver was hilarious, quirky, charming. But to those behind the scenes, he was something else entirely. Sources close to the show say Denver had a different energy, not evil, but sharp, strategic, always calculating. He knew how to steal scenes without saying a word. He knew which jokes would land, and how to land them louder than anyone else. Alan Hale Jr. noticed, and he didn't like it. Imagine this, you're a respected actor, a war vet, a guy who's worked his whole life to earn respect, and now you're being outshined, not by talent or experience, but by a guy who trips over coconuts for laughs. Hale wasn't petty. He didn't lash out. But inside, it ate at him. Every giggle Gilligan got was another reminder that this wasn't his show anymore. And Bob Denver, he wasn't making it any easier. Rumors swirled of ego clashes, quiet jabs on set, passive-aggressive moments in between takes. Some say Hale tried to push back, suggesting more balanced scenes, hinting that the skipper deserved a little more weight. But it fell on deaf ears, because the industry had made up its mind. Gilligan was the star, and Alan Hale Jr. just a sidekick in his own story. That kind of betrayal doesn't just fade away, it festers. To the world, Bob Denver was Gilligan, harmless, clumsy, and goofy in an endearing way. But once the cameras stopped rolling, the mask came off. He wasn't evil, he wasn't a villain. But Bob Denver had an edge, a side that few people ever saw, and fewer dared to talk about. Because behind the wide grin and silly sailor hat was a man who knew exactly how to play the fame game. While Alan Hale Jr. showed up to work like a soldier, on time, professional, humble, Denver was a different breed entirely. He was sharp, ambitious, and some say manipulative. Crew members whispered about Denver's ability to subtly sabotage scenes, shifting punchlines to himself, stealing focus with improv, throwing in accidental bloopers that forced retakes, just to make his version of the joke land harder. He wasn't just competing for laughs, he was dominating them. That spotlight? He guarded it like a hawk, and if you were standing in it too long, he had ways of nudging you out. Quiet ways, clever ways, ways that made it seem like you were the problem. Alan Hale Jr. was a gentle giant, loyal, warm, and steady, but even the calmest man has a breaking point, especially when he feels he's being pushed aside by someone playing dirty. And the more the fans loved Gilligan, the more Alan was left standing in the shadows of the island, alone. It never turned into an open feud. There were no shouting matches or fists thrown. That wasn't Hale's style. But what happened between Alan Hale Jr. and Bob Denver was something worse. A long, cold war. Not explosive, but icy. Quiet, subtle, and deeply personal. Every day on set, the tension was there. You could feel it, like a low hum underneath the jokes and the laughter. Hale would deliver his lines, smile for the camera, but the warmth, it wasn't always real anymore. And Bob, he knew it. Some days Hale wouldn't even look at him between takes. Other days he'd throw shade without ever raising his voice. Just a glance, a pause, a comment aimed to cut. It wasn't loud, but it was loud enough for the crew to notice. They say that comedy comes from pain. And ironically, the best laughs on Gilligan's Island were happening while a silent rivalry brewed just inches off camera. It wasn't just about ego, it was about respect. Hale had built a life in Hollywood. He'd fought in a war. He had earned everything he had, but now, in the biggest role of his career, he was being treated like an afterthought, like the joke was on him. And the worst part, he couldn't say anything, he couldn't complain, because to fans, he was the lovable skipper, the father figure, the rock, so he held it all in. The frustration, the bitterness, the slow-burning resentment, until eventually, it turned into something darker, something permanent. By the time the final season wrapped, the damage was done. Two men who had shared so many laughs on screen could barely share the same space off it. When Gilligan's Island ended in 1967, it didn't just wrap up a show, it left its cast stranded in real life too. Some tried to reinvent themselves, others disappeared entirely. But Alan Hale Jr., he took a different route. He didn't run from the skipper, he embraced it. While other actors from the show tried to distance themselves from their island past, Hale put the damn captain's hat back on and wore it with pride. He signed autographs, made appearances, visited sick kids in character, and even opened a seafood restaurant called Alan Hale's Lobster Barrel. And here's the crazy part, he worked there, in person. Fans would walk in for dinner and be greeted by the skipper himself, not a cardboard cutout, not a poster, the real Alan Hale Jr., shaking hands, telling stories, and pouring drinks like a man who never let fame change him. But deep down, something had changed. While he kept the smile for the public, close friends say Alan never fully got over the way things ended. Not just the show, but the betrayal, the spotlight he lost, the role he could have had if he hadn't been standing next to Bob Denver. And as for Denver, he did the opposite. He leaned into his fame. He toured colleges, got arrested a few times, even got involved in politics. Always Gilligan, always the star. But fans began noticing something strange. When reunion specials happened, when cast members reunited, Alan was always warm, always game. But the minute Bob Denver entered the room, that warmth, gone. They stood next to each other, smiled for the camera, but there was a night between them you could feel, even through the screen. It was like watching a friendship that never existed, trying to pretend it did. Would you have handled it like Alan did? Still smiling in public while holding in that kind of betrayal for decades? But let me know in the comments, because coming up next, their final reunion wasn't a celebration, it was a silent, cold goodbye. In 1987, after years of silence, the two men appeared together one final time. The film? Back to the Beach, a goofy, self-aware tribute to the beach party films of the 60s, a cameo. Just a few seconds. But to fans, it was everything, right? It was the skipper and Gilligan together again, but what the audience didn't see was the tension behind that smile. People on set said the energy was weird, stiff, forced. Hale was polite. Denver cracked jokes. But it wasn't camaraderie, it wasn't chemistry, it was a script. Two men pretending to be friends one last time because that's what people wanted to see, and after the cameras stopped, no warm embrace, No long conversation, just a quiet goodbye, and they walked off in different directions, literally. For Alan Hale Jr., that cameo wasn't a moment of healing. It was closure. His final scene with the man he quietly resented for more than 2 decades. He never talked about it in interviews, never aired the dirty laundry. Because Hale was old school, he took his pain like a professional, silent, composed, smiling on the outside. But ask anyone who really knew him, and they'll tell you, he never forgave Bob Denver. Not fully, not ever. It wasn't about ego anymore. It was about principle, about dignity. And when you've carried that kind of wound for that many years, sometimes the silence says more than words ever could. Alan Hale Jr. passed away in 1990 from thymus cancer. He was only 68. His ashes were scattered in the Pacific Ocean, a fitting farewell for the skipper. Bob Denver never publicly addressed the rumored hatred. Maybe he didn't know how deep it ran, or maybe he did. Despite the bitterness, Hale remains a symbol of decency, strength, and humility in Hollywood. But behind that kind smile, there was a truth hidden for years.